Okay, and now if I hit this, are you all seeing the presentation view? Okay, excellent. So yes, this training, thank you all for joining. This training workshop is about establishing a hyper-local network of sensors to detect air quality, detect air quality and air pollution in Cheverly. And by way of a roadmap, what we're here today, we're here to learn about community science, low-cost air quality monitors. We're going to get a little bit into health, but we're actually splitting this kind of training series into 3 parts. And so we'll get more on the health impacts next time. But today we'll get really deep into what our mission is here, what we're trying to accomplish, and why. Okay, and so I'm first going to kick it over to Dr. Wilson to get us going on community science.
Thank you, Ian. And so when our lab begins, the lab, we do community engagement, environmental. When you think about what is community engagement, we have this community engagement continuum. So from left to right, we go from outreach to consultation to involvement, to participatory to community driven. And so as you think about when we do work in communities, when we do work on these issues, community engagement really focuses on a lot about trust and building relationships. So if you think about outreach is one directional. We're providing information, but we're really not getting feedback from the community members. And so it's not really taking that community experiences around air pollution, for example. Like, what are your experiences around pollution, around having the traffic in your neighborhood? When do you smell the plume? So it's not really being community informed. So when you look at consultation, you have more community involvement. You'll get more information. You started creating a feedback loop between the researcher and the community members. Then you have to get to involvement. You have clear, defined roles, responsibilities. You have clear feedback loops. In many cases, involvement is when you may have a community advisory board or a technical advisory group that provides feedback to a research project. Then for us, the gold standards are really participatory research and community-driven research. So participatory, and I'll talk more about this, community-based participatory research is an example of that, where really we are engaging community in all stages of research process. And community-driven research is where the community is driving the research. It's other community, for the community, by the community. You may or may not have an academic expert or research expert who you get feedback or advice from, guidance from, because you already have those experts internally. You have a high level capacity to do your own research. So you think about, this kind of work, it's really built on relationships. So think about the best relationships you have. What are the characteristics of good relationships? Well, you got to have trust, transparency, openness, right? Good communication. You got to have some Aretha Franklin. You got to have some respect. So, and think about the features of a bad relationship. So we want to, when you're doing partnership work and working with communities, you really have to have good relationships, create good partnerships. And so the foundation for those partnerships is really those processes of engagement, listening, transparency, and that should translate to being able to work together to address the concerns that may be, concerns that community members have. So I wanted to share that, and as such, you move left to right in the continuum, trust increases, communication increases, respect should increase, and impact should increase as you move from left to right on this continuum. Next slide, yeah. So those key ingredients for authentic community engagement, cultural competency. So you think about cultural competency, you gotta be able to understand sort of the cultural context that the community parties are coming from. So it could be, it could be cultural, if you think about language issues, like sometimes there's communities that may have some linguistic isolation. So how do you engage those communities? Culturally, you may engage community through a particular lens. So maybe you work with them as it relates to a faith-based approach to engaging that community. So really understand the cultural background allows you to connect to those communities and be able to deploy research strategies that are beneficial and that will have maximum impact. As I said already, trust is really important. When we work in communities, many cases, the community group that may have a problem doesn't directly contact us. They may contact a environmental group, a green group, and then that green group says, "Hey, yes, y'all should talk to the folks at the University of Maryland." So that's an example of leveraging trust. So you have to kind of leverage trust then to build trust. Okay, we have to attend to power inequities. In many cases between academic institutions and community-based organizations, there's a lot of power differences. Funding-wise, we may have more infrastructure, more resources, more staffing. Also, if you're working with a government agency or maybe an industry group, because of the recognized power they have in the community, you may have an issue where when it comes to decision-making, they have more power in the decision-making process. That's an inequity. So you have to really find ways through memorandums of understanding, MOUs, to make sure you address the power inequity so everybody has the same amount of power when it comes to decision-making. You want to attend to conflict. So we have to make sure we focus on conflict resolution. And that could be baggage that some organizations have when it comes to working with universities. Because, for example, the universities have a tendency to do research that's extractive. And so when you have that in your community where, hey, University of Maryland students keep coming to our community studying problems, but we haven't actually addressed the problem. That creates tension, that creates conflict. It's important to be able to do conflict resolution to address some of those conflicts. And then also a lot of times when we work with community-based organizations, they may have limited capacity. And so I'll kind of just explain that. Capacity is basically like, the ability to address a particular issue, right? So you think about individual level capacity, you have leadership capacity, you have organizational capacity, and you have programmatic capacity. So our job is to help when it comes to training, increasing individual level capacity and leadership capacity, providing access to funds and resources to help address organizational capacity, and then providing access to different partners, resources, programs to help address issues with programmatic capacity. And that also, by addressing the capacity issue, it leads to more agency in those community-based organizations, which should also lead to the opportunity to address some of the power inequities too, because by building capacity, you bring groups up so they're at the same level as the academic partners. You still may have some infrastructure and resource disparities, but by that capacity building, it should really allow community-based organizations to have the opportunity to be way more engaged in decision-making and have the skills and tools they need and the agency they need to be able to address the problem better. And so it's like teaching people how to fish. By doing capacity building, we're teaching you how to fish. And so when we leave, when the academic partner leaves, you still have the capacity to do the work, and then you still have the ability to have sustainability. So when our collaboration ends, you can still keep working on those issues. Next slide, please. So going back to that community engagement continuum, I talked about participatory research. The gold standard for participatory research is called community-based participatory research. So this is a collaborative community-based approach where the community is engaged in all stages of the research process. That includes the development of research questions, the study design, data collection, data analysis in some cases, also dissemination of the research, and then translation of that data to action. The reason why CBPR is sort of one of the gold standards, the idea is, you want to make sure those who are on the front line and fence line of these issues are the ones leading the studies. Community members they have the contextual expertise. I talk a lot about, I live in Bowie. I have a little bit of air pollution issues, but I don't live in a community that has, a lot of air quality problems like other communities in the state of Maryland, right? So as a scientist, I have more general knowledge. The people who live in the communities have something what I call specificatory knowledge. In Bayesian terms, specificatory knowledge. So you have specific knowledge about your lived context. So we have to leverage and uplift community and cultural knowledge systems in the research, okay? And so when we look at, the core values, community knowledge is useful. One of my community mentors, Dr. Mitchell McLean, some work we do in Savannah, she said, Jacoby, we live in these communities, you don't. We're the true subject matter experts. So you have to respect and value that. Again, we want to have shared power, control, ownership of the research and the data. And in many cases, when you talk to other scientists, well, they talk about subjects, the subjects in our study. We don't use that term subject. That's a undermining, otherizing, a disempowering term, calling you a dehumanizing term, actually, calling you a subject, right? You're not an object. You are an agent. You are a stakeholder. You are a participant. So then the researchers, we're not the director or expert. I mean, I'm an expert I'm an expert on environmental justice and air pollution, right? But really what I know is very little in the grand scheme of things. So it's really the researcher going from the expert and being, director to more facilitator, a catalyst, a connector, a node. So I help to connect you to resources, connect you to partners, connect you to networks, connect you to research grants, connect you to technologies, sensors, help you get skills and tools. That's what I see my role as a researcher. So I don't know a lot about too much stuff, to be honest. So that's a different way to kind of approach these things. So you think about CBPR compared to traditional research, what's the purpose? Conventional research, understand the problem. CBPR is about finding action. Who is the research for? Traditional research, institutions, government agencies, academic institutions, for folks that do a study like me, like I need to get this study done so I can get papers published, so I can get promoted. Well, whereas when it comes to research is with CBPR, community-based research, it's for the people, okay? Whose knowledge counts? In traditional research, my knowledge counts because I'm at the ivory tower. I have a PhD, whatever. In CBPR, local people's knowledge counts, okay? And with researchers. Who chooses the topic? In many cases with conventional research, it's based on that RFP, request for proposals, right? Or RFA, request for applications, or maybe based on the goals and objectives of that particular research institution. In the case of community-based participatory research, its local priorities are really emphasized, okay? And then who conducts the research? As I've already said, traditional research, folks at government agencies, researchers at government agencies, researchers at academic institutions. But in the case of community-based participatory research, it's local people and researchers. We do it together. There's co-creation, okay? There's co-creation. So again, who identifies the problem? In traditional research, the researcher, again, because we're the experts on everything, supposedly. When community-based research, it's local people and researchers, okay? But really local people, okay? Who collects the data? Traditional research, just a researcher. In community-based research, local people and the researcher. Again, we collaborate, partnership. Who analyzes the data? Conventional research, the researcher does. Again, researchers we know everything. That's a problem, y'all. I'll get to that. The scientific enterprise, Western science, look at the US, is highly problematic. And I'm gonna get to that. I'm really not a big fan of traditional research. And then community-based research. Who analyzes data? Both local people and researchers. So it's collaboration again. Who presents the findings to whom? Usually researchers, we go to a conference, we go off pontificate and intellectualize about our great studies. Maybe I'm doing a little stereotyping, y'all. I'm broad brushing. This is being bad a little bit, but y'all get what I'm saying. We also publish. I'm actually the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Environmental Justice. I think it's important to publish, but I also think it's important for the folks who are on the front line, the fence line, who are impacted with these issues, to talk about their own work across through different communication modalities, whether it be through publications, whether it be through community reports, newsletters, infographics, white papers, newspaper, radio, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and whatever. So, but when you think about CBPR, when it comes to presenting the data, all of us, local people, researchers, policymakers, academics, regulators, we're all presenting the findings, and we're presenting the findings that the folks who can actually impact change. What's really, really important about this work is publications are important, but think about it. Do y'all care about a publication as community members? Does the mayor care about the publication? Is the mayor gonna read the publication? Get the publication. I'm not speaking for the mayor, but get the publication. Give me your 15-second elevator speech. Give me your 30-second elevator speech, or give me your 15-second elevator speech visual. or your 30-second elevator speech visual. A publication is like a 2-hour elevator speech. Who wants to be in the elevator for 2 hours? Listen to an academic drone on and on. Okay? Think about that visual. That's not how you impact change. That's not how you impact policy. For example, as an example of this, we have a weekly we have a work group where we started meeting with legislators October 19th after the Environmental Justice Symposium. So we met with Delegate Love, Delegate Charkoudian, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, Senator Elfrid came on board every once in a while to give some talk about some bills. We've worked directly with policymakers on bills, and those bills are in session right now. That's impact. That's translating science to action. That's more effective than publishing in a journal. So that's one of my soapboxes. I'll move away from that. And where does action come in? It's separate. So somebody can say, "Oh, Jacoby, it's not my job to translate this research to action." People make a choice to do that. If you're living with pollution and you're doing this research, you don't have a choice not to translate to action. So again, so for CBPR, action is at the heart of it. It's just not good enough to collect data. You have to be focused on action, solutions, and social change. Next slide again. So, and I was talking before about sort of my philosophy of science and why I don't like traditional research. So Ernest Boyer talked about the 5 dimensions of science: the scholarship of inquiry, the scholarship of integration, the scholarship of teaching, the scholarship of engagement, and the scholarship of application. So inquiry is basically data collection, discovery science. And a lot of folks put, their bones into discovery science. They want to study you, they're curious about this, they're curious about that, and I got this new data set. Fine and good. What happens in science, in my opinion, we've over-commodified, we over-incentivized discovery science, okay? You have a scholarship of integration. That's been multidisciplinary. Think about it for a second. You have a problem that's a mountain, right? You have one discipline with a pickaxe, say environmental health, trying to pick at the mountain, this problem. Oh my God, environmental health by myself. Oh, look at me, I'm doing it all by myself. That's not how it works. You have to have multiple disciplines solving the problem with multiple pickaxes, right? You have to have, epidemiology. You have to have history, planning, political science, anthropology, sociology, geography, okay? You have to have environmental science working together. You have to have a multi-pronged prismatic approach to addressing the problem. That's very important to this work, because as those of you who are living with the problems, you can't look at it through a stovepipe or through through one kind of dimension. You have to look at it multidimensionally, okay? The scholarship of teaching, I'm teaching now during this presentation, but we also learn from community members. You teach us. The scholarship of engagement, how do you engage different populations who have these issues, who overburden, who may be underserved, who are dealing with pollution issues? Engagement science is really difficult. In a scholarship application, how do we apply the data, apply the knowledge that we gain to actually solve problems? And I like to say, if you're not doing all 5 dimensions of science, you're doing incomplete science. And so there's a lot of scientists who really only focus on discovery science because they can choose to do so. It's actually a form of privilege. You have the privilege to not focus on action. But for me, I'm a researcher activist, researcher advocate. I come from a community that had a landfill, that had a sewage treatment plant, that had a highway, that had a concrete plant, grew up in poverty, okay? So I don't have a choice to do science. I can't do science that's extractive. I can't do science that's helicopter science. I don't do science that's, sort of, we go in a community to kind of study people. Think about folks who are dealing with a lot of environmental hazards of pollution, and people are suffering. Let me just say this, y'all. I've been saying this a lot to my EPA colleagues. When we permit facilities to pollute in the community, that's a form of state-sanctioned poisoning. To me, it's a form of state-sanctioned violence. And since I work in a lot of communities of color, think about all the violence the communities of color are already dealing with. So if you're just studying the problem and extracting data, that's macabre. So I like to share with y'all, I'm not curious about a single issue I work on. I'm trying to get data to solve problems, to seek action. I primarily do liberation science, empowerment science. That's what I do. So I'm not your traditional scientist. If y'all didn't know that already, now you know. I'm not here to study stuff. We already have enough data. I'm here to help you get your tools and skills that you need to document your own problems so that can be translated to action. Science is a means to an end. Science is not an end. okay, in my opinion. And so I want us in this collaboration to understand that. And so we're trying to help you collect the data so you can actually address the problems. I'm not interested in getting publications out of this. Maybe we will publish down the road, but that's not the immediate goals of what we're trying to do. We're trying to document the problems in the community, document the air quality issues, so you can translate to action. You know, it's about empowerment science. I'll get to that. Next slide, please, Yan. So we think about this work that we do, and we kind of go back to community engagement. What are the issues in the community? You know, so these engagement bridges, like the two hands of engagement, okay? First hand, what are the issues? What are the impacts the communities experience from those issues? What are the opportunities to collaborate? Okay, so going back to community engagement continuum. What are the benefits of collaboration? When you work with researchers, you know, some people are gonna come in like, oh no, I have to study, I got this grant, I need a community partner. You know, we got like two months to do this work. We got 2 years, and they may come in with their own motivations, their own why. Okay, you want to have transparency in your why, and the community has its own why. If people are transparent, and the why's they don't have to match up all the time. Because okay, you're gonna get this out of it, I'm gonna get this out of it, and there's some reciprocal benefits. Then you can make it work. That can lead to the partnership. So you got to know what people's whys are, what the potential benefits are, and that can lead to partnership. Now, for me, when it comes to these issues from a science perspective, environmental justice perspective, environmental health, air quality perspective, in many ways, you can connect any issue we work on to food, faith, family, health, and jobs. So we try to make sure that we are making science proximal, making it pocketbook, and making it everyday. Again, making science real for folks, and making sure that science has utility, and science is focused on things that are really important to everyone every day, right? And science focuses on action. Next slide, please, Jan. So we have that community engagement continuum, and we have community-based participatory research. Another sort of way to call that kind of research, not just community-based participatory research, there's also something called participatory action research. So you have CVPR, then you also have PAR, okay? Now, a different but connected type of science is called citizen science. And that term is really not that inclusive, so we've been trying to say more like community science. But citizen science has traditionally been like bird watching, right, and water quality monitoring. Citizen science, in many ways, in the traditional framing, has been top-down science, where a researcher has a question. I want to know how many new stars, how many stars are out in a certain, solar system. And this is a project called Galaxy Zoo, where you can go online and do some counting of stars or some classification of galaxies, right? Or it could be a NASA scientist who puts a question out there. And so you have this more massive intelligence where folks are using their computers and their own brains to contribute to science, but there's more out of curiosity and not necessarily the action-based science that we just talked about with CVPR. Next slide again. And so this citizen science is an approach to get environmental information to solicit public input. You have different types of citizen science. So civic, community science, community-based monitoring, popular epidemiology, participatory sensing, crowd mapping, which I'll talk about a little bit. Yeah, I'll talk about too. Public participation, scientific research, public science. So there's some different names for it. But really, it's about getting folks engaged to collect data. Data collection is really, really sort of core to traditional citizen science to address real world problems. And so if you go back to the community engagement continuum that I showed you, remember I talked about community-based participatory research and also talked about community-driven research. Citizen science would probably fall in more like the community involvement space if you want to try to fit it in to that continuum. But some ways it's like trying to put a square peg in a circular hole. It doesn't really fit neatly on a community engagement continuum because a lot of traditional citizen science is just data collection. Whereas I said before, CPPR is what? Communities involved in all stages of the research process. Questions, study design, implementation, including data collection, data analysis, dissemination, and translation to action. But a lot of traditional citizen science, we get all these volunteers to go out and collect this data. And after that, thank you for collecting the data, and that's it. So that's some differences between CPPR and traditional citizen science. Even though citizen science is kind of changing in many ways So you have the traditional citizen science, but you actually have other types of citizen science too that are more participatory, that are more than just the community just doing data, the volunteers just doing data collection. But citizen scientists traditionally tend to be more white, also more higher income folks, like more affluent. And so you have a different population in traditional citizen science than what you have in CBPR, okay? And you have different motivations and also different outcomes, different actions that are taken, okay? And so citizen science, these approaches are rooted in different disciplines, and again, emphasize different goals. But one of the really important things about citizen science is this approach on openness, democratization of science, which is really, really important. So if you get back to Boyer's 5 Missions of Science, in a way, that's also democratization of science, but making sure that anybody can do science. One thing I can say to everyone, yes, I have a PhD. I don't believe I'm the only person who can be a scientist. I'm gonna say this to y'all. This is maybe groundbreaking a statement. Anybody can be a scientist, folks. You don't have to have a PhD to be a scientist. So one of the great things about citizen science is trying to make science more inclusive, okay? Make it more diverse. And one of the things I want to say, go to the next slide, please, Yan. You know, one of the things I want to say, I'm actually on the board of the Citizen Science Association. It's actually an international group, but you said national, the National Citizen Science Association. And one of the reasons why I joined the board was to bring a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice to the board, or like we like to say Jedi, you know, we're like nerdy, so we like to bring that, we like the force be with you. So we try to I'm bringing Jedi to the organization and Jedi to the board. So now you think about the benefits of citizen science, just like in the same ways you have some similar benefits to CBPR. You know, you engage in communities, you're doing collaborative governance, so you're able to work together to get community members more engaged in decision making, particularly when you're working with a government agency, where it be, you know, local government agency like the town council with the mayor's office, right? Or a state agency like MDE, Maryland Department of Environment, or a federal agency like the US EPA or Health and Human Services, Department of Interior, Department of Justice, USDA, you know, United States Department of Agriculture, et cetera. You create a common vision. So that's where that you know, the whys I talked about before, where your whys match up. You create a common vision of, you know, how you use science to promote open government, and also why it's important to volunteer. I mean, I want to say anything. I wasn't trying to say anything bad about being a volunteer. Volunteering for scientific research process is really important, and I think that volunteering really gets at the spirit of, you know, being a engaged citizen or engaged resident. You know, how do you make a democracy work? It takes work. And being a volunteer, whether it be volunteering to be on the town council or being on a zoning board or working in a civic organization or social service organization, those things are important. Same way it's important to volunteer to contribute to scientific enterprises. But we will make sure those scientific enterprises are just not extractive, right? That they're just not helicopter science. So we're actually, scientific enterprises are leading to real impact and real social change. As I said, I do empowerment science, liberation science. I do science for the people and science for social justice. Okay, so it's a little bit different. We want to make sure through citizen science we get actionable information. So good data, rigorous data that can be used for policy making, that can be used for social change. We share knowledge. One of the great things about citizen science, you bring different types of people together. And so it can accelerate scientific research. A lot of scientific innovations are not happening in academia. Some are, but a lot happening with the people, because you're doing DIY science, you're doing it yourself science. You're doing this science where you're pushing the envelope. And one of the reasons why it's so exciting to see this project is, you know, folks who said we need hyperlocal air quality monitoring because the EPA regulatory monitoring network is not enough. And the fact that the supply and demand is pushing it, you see more companies out there creating new technologies to address this science gap in monitoring. So regular folks are making that happen, not the EPA. The EPA is actually has to catch up with the wave. Has to capture the wave. So technology, go back in. Accessible technology. So as I just said, there are a lot of companies that are creating citizen science technologies that you can use when it comes to air quality, when it actually comes to water quality. There's other things that new technologies actually tracking microbial exposures as well. So citizen science is really pushing innovation in technologies that are available. And then also it helps with environmental literacy. One of the important things I think as a scientist that I want to say, the reason why we've had so much erosion in the trust of science, we had an anti-science administration, but just the general erosion in trust of science, we haven't made science accessible to everyone, and we haven't focused on basic scientific literacy. And so that includes environmental literacy, environmental health literacy. And so I think this helps, and this is not, I don't just mean basic literacy, I mean critical literacy. So you increase your knowledge and awareness, but because of critical literacy, you now have increased agency to do something about it. We just give you information. We've increased your critical knowledge base so you can actually act on the information that you receive. That's another important part of citizen science. Next slide again. And so this is just a little photo of the different types of citizen science, traditional citizen science that's out there. But as I said, there's like emerging new types of citizen science, like community-based citizen science. In many ways, community-based citizen science has a lot of overlap, has a lot of synergy with community-based participatory research. So when you think about community-based citizen science, it's focused on a specific place, a specific community, like Cheverly, for example, or like we said, I work in Savannah, we're working in Uniontown, Alabama, we're doing work in Charleston, South Carolina. We're also trying to do some work around air quality monitoring around chicken farms in the Eastern Shore. I've done some work in Baltimore. We've done work in Bladensburg, done some monitoring work in DC with colleagues at Trent. So we do a lot of place-based monitoring, right? That community-based monitoring. But we also have crowd-based monitoring. So we use the crowd. So think about these sensors we're talking about. We have a lot of folks who have a sensor at their household, or sensors just not at households in Cheverly. Say we have sensors at houses across the DC region. One of the proposals I just submitted to NASA in May, and a proposal I submitted to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences in January, was to really build a region-wide hyperlocal air quality monitoring network using these sensors across the whole DC region. Have like 1,000 sensors all across DC measuring particulate matter. So that's what you call crowd-based monitoring. And then it also in some ways be crowd-based mapping, okay? Keep going through, click through this again. And so what we're doing is, there's different ways to handle data when it's community-based versus when it's crowd-based. And also you gotta think about how are you gonna use the data? In a lot of cases, we use this data for just education purposes, but as Yan's gonna show, this data with low-cost sensors can be used not just for education, we can use this data for policy. We may be able to use this data for social change. We may be able to use this data for permitting. Part of my work as a scientist working with MDE, Maryland Department of Environment, I'm also on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where we provide recommendations to the EPA about how to integrate environmental justice to policymaking. We've been pushing for citizen science data, community-based data, could be used at the federal level, to be used in bills, to be used in decision-making. So that's another wave of innovation that's coming, where this data can have a direct impact on public policy. And I think Yan will talk more about that when some of our conversations with Tad Abram with Maryland Department of Environment. Next slide, Yan. And so I think this is my last slide. So the idea is that citizen science, whether it be traditional citizen science, more of the community-based or the crowd-based citizen science, can be used to empower citizens, empower residents to remember to be inclusive. So community science can be used to empower residents and build community capacity to address environmental health issues. And y'all probably reading this slide like, oh, empower is spelled incorrectly. No, you know how activists like to make up new terms. So instead of saying empower with an EM, like I can't give you power. And when people say, I'm gonna empower you, that's really, what's the word? Like, it's just like, oh, it's like a privilege thing to kind of say, I'm going to give you power. I'm going to come save you. That's not what we're trying to do. Our idea is to use science to empower folks. How we can bring science and scientific tools to the people that help you connect to the power you already have, to actualize your power, to speak with your own voices using the data you collected, to tell your own story through the data, and get you to a seat at the table with decision makers to affect change. That's what empowerment's all about. And so my lab is really focusing on what we call the scientific empowerment model. Okay, so I'll end there. I think that's the last slide from me.
Thanks, Dr. Wilson. Let me get my video back on. So now I think would be a good point to kind of break it up a little bit. Abraham has put some discussion questions in the Q&A section. So if you could, over the next, 5 minutes, think about those answers. You can respond to them in the Q&A section, or you can hold on to them and we'll have kind of a group chat, and I can highlight people, I think, to speak these issues if they want to speak them out loud. But just to kind of finish off what kind of transition us away from what Dr. Wilson was talking about, we're talking about how can we use all of these tools for air quality monitoring and do it, in a way that's community informed and community based. And so now we're going to talk about some of the specific, we talked a little bit about maybe the philosophical tools, but now we're going to talk about the specific, what as a part of this project, how could you, if you decide to join on as a monitor host, how can you get engaged? How can you interact with the data, interact with these tools? So as Dr. Wilson was talking about, I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with the scientific method. If you haven't used or seen, you've probably used the scientific method more than you've actually thought about the scientific method, unless you have kids going through school now that are learning it. But it follows this really simple trajectory. You make an observation, you see something piques your interest, and then you ask a question about it. Why is that happening in that way? And then you do a little bit of research. These days, I'm quick to hop on Google for my everyday research. When things when I look out the window and wonder why something is a different color, I'll hop on Google. And then I make a hypothesis kind of based on that preliminary research, test that hypothesis with an experiment, then you see what results you get, and then you make your final conclusion. And these aren't always final conclusions. This process is iterative all the time, and you're constantly going back and forth. And then you share your results and you repeat. And so from a citizen perspective, a really quick and dirty example of this when we're talking about air quality monitoring is, hey, something stinks. I'm in Cheverly, and there's that Cheverly stink again that I've heard. So I don't live in Cheverly, but I've heard plenty about this Cheverly fog. So what is that? Well, go on Google. Internet says that PM in the air can be associated with really bad smells. Okay, that's something to think about. But now how do I test that? And then, well, if we're using these low-cost monitors that I'm going to talk about soon, we can put out a monitor and measure the levels of this PM, and PM stands for particulate matter, which we'll go into a little bit more depth in a second. And then so we do our monitoring, either a stationary monitoring or personal monitoring, where stationary being we set our monitor in one spot, personal is we keep it on us and we walk around the town. And then we get our data. So my air quality monitor showed high levels of PM. Therefore, there are high levels of PM in my neighborhood, and this is why it smells bad. Now, this might not necessarily be the whole truth, but this is at least part of the truth. And then, as Dr. Wilson was saying, academics will work to get this into a journal, but sharing your data is as easy as telling your mom, telling your family, telling your friends, posting it on Twitter, posting it on Instagram. It doesn't, science communication, journal publications are not the end all be all. So you can be a scientist and never have anything published in any kind of academic journal and still have lots of impact. And then you repeat with a new question or the same question, but you want to go into further depth. And this is an example of, just potentially what our air quality monitoring data might look like. Oh, here's our really big spike for particulate matter, not so much for these other pollutants. But while we're talking about these different pollutants, let's make it relevant to Cheverly, okay? So a couple years ago, then Mayor Michael Callahan approached us in our lab and said, hey, we're interested, we're concerned about air quality in Cheverly. We're concerned with all of the traffic that we have, the community traffic. And again, this was before the COVID times, although traffic is starting to kind of ramp up now again. But we're concerned with the traffic, and in and out of DC, there's a lot of diesel truck traffic. There's a lot of diesel. You don't get diesels on the parkway so much, but coming in and out of 50 and around town. As you all know, Cheverly is kind of encircled by these highways. So those are your mobile sources of traffic. And then you have point sources. So we have some industry. We have Smith & Sons down here in the southwest corner. There's some asphalt operations going on along on the other side of the parkway. And now more recently, since Mayor Riazi has come into office, we've been turned on to the distribution, the distribution centers and the Amazon Gateway project. So all of these concerns brought to us made us curious. Okay, as scientists, as academics, what tools do we have at our disposal to kind of see what air quality is like in Cheverly? What kind of existing monitoring framework is there to tell us what's going on in Cheverly? And so we use a tool called US EPA EJ Screen, where we typed in Cheverly, Maryland, and this is the readout that it gave us. Comparing it to the state and comparing it to the country, Cheverly ranks, and then here are all the different ranks. So for particulate matter 2.5, it's in the, we'll call this like the 60th percentile compared to the rest of the country, but it's up there in the 90th percentile compared to the rest of the state. Go over here to ozone, again, 70th for the country, pretty low though, comparing it to the rest of the state. But for all of these we call these indicators of air pollution, or in this case, not air pollution, but water pollution. For all these other indicators, it's really high compared to the rest of the state and compared to the rest of the country. So this is our way of kind of getting community information from residents in Cheverly, the mayor and other people, involved in the town council and other community members, and then pairing that with the data, with kind of the scientific data that's available from agencies. However, this might not necessarily even be the full picture because, as Dr. Wilson was talking about, there are gaps in where this monitoring is taking place. Yeah, there's monitoring happening in DC, but then in terms of Prince George's County, there's monitoring that's happening up in Beltsville, and then there's monitoring that's happening down in Upper Marlboro, and that's about it, right? And so Cheverly is not really anywhere near either of those two places. And so how could these values, which are supposed to be representative of Cheverly, Maryland, how representative are they? That's the question that we want to get at. And so while we're talking about air pollution, let's call it out, let's name it. So I mentioned particulate matter, and particulate matter is a byproduct of fossil fuel combustion. Particulate matter actually comes from, there are a lot of different sources of particulate matter, but as we are concerned with it, it can come from combustion in your homes, combustion from vehicles, factories, of wildfires, and natural events also contribute to it. And it can also, and this is very relevant for Maryland, it can be blown in from other states. But particulate matter is a primary pollutant. That means something here directly, like say it comes directly out of the exhaust of your car, right? It comes out in that form as particulate matter. The same can be said for volatile organic compounds, which are more kind of smelly compounds. Those are also a resultant from vehicle exhaust. Nitrogen dioxide is also a resultant from vehicle exhaust. So these are the kind of three main ones of concern when we're talking about air pollution. But you also, so those are primary pollutants, but then you also have secondary pollutants. And that means the reason there's this big old sun over here, that means that your primary pollutant comes out, say your nitrogen dioxide comes out the back of a tailpipe of a big diesel engine truck, right? But then when it's exposed to sunlight and gets heated up, it transforms into ozone. And that's actually that hazy smog that you see, that's more often than not predominantly ozone pollution, ground level ozone. We've heard of the ozone layer that protects us from, it kind of protects us from radiation from the sun. But when we have that ozone down at our breathing area, it's a problem. So these are some of the pollutants in the air pollution that we're talking about when we're thinking about what could be going on in Cheverly. And so now to zoom in a little bit more on Cheverly, I'm going to come out of my presentation and show you all a map Oops, let's go. Okay. And for this part, I am going to pass the mic to Ngozi to talk through this map. So go ahead and you can unmute yourself, Ngozi. And
everyone.
Go ahead.
Do you have the map up?
Yeah, can you all see it, or is it not sharing anymore?
I'm still on 2 types of air quality monitoring. Okay, here it is.
Okay.
Yeah, we see it. So here's the town boundary of Cheverly. We have different layers of tentative spots we want to put monitors. So this first layer, this black layer, is a different traffic areas. So 202, Route 50, 295, and then some of the other areas, the Amazon distribution warehouse. So the areas that will probably give the most traffic and the most air pollution is where the black layer is and where we want to put those monitors. We have our next layer, which is a gray layer, which is a new development that
this is one that Karen had pointed out to us. Yep, planned new development. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and then we have our green layer, which are different neighborhoods in Cheverly. We have Old World 4, the Cheverly Station Apartments, and South Ward 2. And then our purple layer are already installed monitors, our PurpleAir monitors, which one in the town hall. We have one in Boyd Park, the town pool, and we have one at Karen's house, and then another one down here. So these are the PurpleAir monitors that are already installed throughout Cheverly. And then our light blue are the residential addresses. So we have a few of these that would go in outside of Cheverly residents' homes. A yellow area, which are businesses, so not too many outside the boundaries. And then our last layer, our orange layers, are different schools and educational businesses. So St. Ambrose, PGCPS, the Spelman School, Fairmont Heights, and then Bladensburg High School. So these are just all of the different tentative spots we could place our air monitors in to get good spots on our air pollution.
Thanks, Ngozi. And the whole point of this distribution, there's looking at it like this, it kind of looks like a scramble, but there's a method to the madness. The reason that the residential addresses kind of give us the opportunity to have coverage throughout the town, but there are also kind of, especially if Governor Hogan gets his way of getting schools back, by March, and that's old knowledge. I don't know of what the update is. The last I heard was that was one of the desires of the administration. But we want areas where people are congregating. So just like Dr. Wilson was saying, food, faith, family, jobs, parks, places where people will be kind of breathing the same air is important to monitor, just as important as having kind of individual monitoring at residences and at businesses. And so this is, when we're looking at this plan, this air quality monitoring, we're looking at it holistically. Public services, private entities, residences, it's all kind of one Cheverly. All of these areas, all of these people, you all are all breathing the same air and impacted in the same way. So that's kind of the method to the madness for developing this air monitoring scheme throughout the town. And as I said, initially, one of the first things to kind of kick this off was concerns about noise concerns, smell concerns from Smith & Sons scrap metal recycling down here on the southwest side of town. And I think I have to share back to, or actually what I'm going to do, keep this up. So are you guys still seeing the map? Okay, so now I want to take the opportunity to, it's showing up a little, sorry, it's showing up a little weird on my screen. So now I want to take the opportunity to kind of read through the discussion. Abraham put up a few questions concerning air quality in the town of Cheverly. And if there are any people who would like to voice their responses out loud, you can raise your hand. And I can't actually see the raised hands. It's gone away from my screen right now. So if one of my lovely co-facilitators can just let me know if there are any raised hands, but otherwise I can kind of read through. And so starting this off, Sheila says, we came to this project with a specific question: how can we collect air pollution data for a particular firm neighboring, but not within Cheverly? Sorry. For a particular firm neighboring, but not within Cheverly. I see, and that would be Smith & Sons, I think. We have not yet organized sensor collecting data for the site. We'll have a base data for other possible pollution sources, but we still have the initial problem. So yes, we are working on getting coverage around the issue with Smith & Sons here that's kind of tricky is that this whole area is industrial, and typically industrial sources are not very open and welcoming to monitoring, outside monitoring. And so what we have to do is we're reaching out to communities nearby around here to put monitors, and that's particularly the UCAP ministries or Community Against Poverty Incorporated nonprofit, to kind of set up proximity, proximal monitoring around that area. So that's kind of a hard nut to crack, but originally, like I said, that was the emphasis, the impetus for embarking on this project. So we're going to figure it out.
So yeah, let me jump in. So there's other types of monitoring that could be done, more expensive, and yeah, more expensive. That may get you better data. Drone monitoring is something to be done, but we don't do drone monitoring. You also have airplanes that could do monitoring, that can look in that vertical column, monitoring. We don't have access to those kind of resources. So for the kind of monitoring that we can do, and actually particulate matter, there are some gaps in monitoring. Particulate matter is only one type of pollutant that's coming from the facility. There's other pollutants that we don't have access to to equipment. So if you want more comprehensive monitoring, there's more cost associated with that. Now that could be, we have Russ Dickerson at UMD who could potentially, he does the plane monitoring, depending upon the chemicals that you want to look at, he could do that, but there's cost. There's way more cost associated with that monitoring. The drone monitoring, there's more cost. There's also, you have to get permission, depending upon, how high you want to go and get permissions from the FAA to do the drone monitoring. So there's other types of monitoring that can be done that would probably get, better data, but those types of monitoring have much bigger costs associated with them. So I just want to share that real quick. Go ahead, Ian.
Thanks. And then, so going on down, we have from Dan, it feels like no authorities have the responsibility to monitor air quality in and around our community and to take action to inform us and remedy the situation. And that's exactly true. On paper, MDE is supposed to be doing this monitoring, but they have broad latitude of where they select to put, and they have resource limitations as well, but their priorities are not necessarily community monitoring. It's more so state and regional monitoring. And so that's why we have these gaps where, the regulatory monitors might be saying one thing about the exposure that the whole area is having, but then you have these hotspots that aren't being covered and might have much higher threat or much higher risk than what's shown in the broad sense. So that's exactly why we're doing this project.
And also to add to what Yan said, the regulatory monitors is for the regulations. Are we in attainment with ozone standard? Are we in attainment with the particulate matter standard? Are we in attainment with the nitrogen dioxide standard? Are we in attainment with the sulfur dioxide standard? Hey, we're in attainment. That's the general area, y'all. But when it comes to the specific community, local level, if you have hotspots, as Yan said, they're not really doing that type of monitoring unless you collect some data to say, hey, we see a signal here. We believe that's a problem. We need you to come in and do additional monitoring to activate MDE to do more. And that's also part of the reason why I mentioned those bills before, trying to get bills pushed through the state legislature that would force MDE to use more of its authority to do more of this hotspot type of monitoring that we're talking about.
Yeah, and just to give everyone an idea, I think it should be back on my slides now. Is that what you guys are seeing?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Air quality monitoring in Maryland and stationary air quality monitors.
Right. So this is the network of air quality monitoring throughout the state. And this is the last time I pulled it down, which was a few months ago. And these points do change periodically. But as you can see, you know, you have these Beltsville monitors and you have this Upper Marlboro monitor. And then when we're just looking at Prince George's County, you know, there's all of this that's not being covered and not being monitored. And so what we are doing, what we're planning on doing, that we've been talking about these monitors. So here's a look at the specific monitors. One is called the PurpleAir 2, and it measures that particulate matter that comes, like I said, from fossil fuel burning power plants or fossil fuel burning cars. It's stationary, which means you put it in one place and it monitors in that place. It's an indicator grade sensor, which I'll get to in a second. These are the different levels, different sizes of particulate matter that it monitors. It measures once every 120 seconds. So roughly, it's a little bit less actually than every 2 minutes. And then the other monitor that we have is an AeroQual, which measures PM 2.5, particulate matter of size 2.5. The size is important, but we'll get into why once we talk about our health impacts in the next session. Nitrogen dioxide and ozone. So that's stationary monitoring, and now move to personal monitoring. Why would you want personal monitoring? Well, if you have your stationary monitor, like I said, you put it in one spot and it can only ever monitor the air in that spot. It might get air that's coming from other places, but the monitor itself is staying in one spot. So if you want to see, for instance, what you as an individual are being exposed to, that monitor would have to follow you wherever you're going. And so this is a better indicator of what's actually getting inside your body, because even if you have your stationary monitor outside your window, you're not always right outside that window. You might leave that spot, but also you might sometimes, you know, in your house, you might have a HEPA filter that's shielding you a little bit from the effects of that monitor. So to really get a better idea of what you're actually getting, you know, taking into your body in terms of these air pollutants, you need to do some personal monitoring. And to do that, we have a few personal monitors called the Flow that we've purchased for the town, or that the town has purchased. And these measure particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and VOCs, which again, I said were those kind of smelly compounds. Like when the smell of gasoline comes from from its VOC components. Benzene, I think, is the smelliest one. Benzene is that when you smell gas, you're smelling benzene. And speaking of smells, there is an app developed by the Pittsburgh General Hospital and I think Carnegie Mellon, and picked up by 7th Generation Cleaning Products, which is a free smartphone app. You load it onto your phone, and basically whenever you smell something, you just punch it in, right? It records where you are in space. It records the time, the date, and you can describe what you're smelling. You can describe the area. You can describe what kind of effect it's having on you, or you think it's having on you. And then what it does is it creates a little pin and drops it on a map. And what you can do, you can go through and see this data over time and see what other people have been reporting in the smells. It can show the wind direction. So you can see, like, if there is a smell down here and the wind is facing, and you're up here and the wind is coming this, you can expect to smell it soon. Or you can say, this is something, what I'm smelling now is something that other people were smelling in the South earlier today. So this is a really cool tool that we would really like to see communities using more, because like I said, it's got wide use in Pittsburgh. It was developed in Pittsburgh. There are a few other kind of big areas, I think, Lexington, Kentucky has a big hotspot, but there's not really one for the DC area. So databases are only as good as the data that's going into them or the people that are using them. So it would be really great to see this database expanded for the DC, for the Cheverly area. And that you can find that on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Just type in smell my city. For some reason, my city is one word. Artistic license, I guess. And so there were some questions in the Q&A about the data. And so this is the monitoring that we've been doing. And Ngazi went over this. So we have 5 monitors live right now, and you can find them at this website, purpleair.com. Just going to purpleair.com is fine. I put the whole link here, but if you type in purpleair.com, even /map, it'll let you search for Cheverly and zoom you right here. And so these are the monitors, one at Town Hall, one at the American Legion, one at a residence house, one at the pool, and one at Boyd Park. This one is from a community member, Nick. He's had his monitor up actually for years before our project started. So this one isn't necessarily a part of our network, but you can see it there at because this map will show you all of the established monitors in the area. So a couple cool things about this, it tells you right away based on the color what the air quality is like, right? So now we're in the yellow zone at 38, which isn't perfect, but it's not bad. Or actually, sorry, we're in the 0. So the 0 to 50 air quality is considered satisfactory, okay? It also shows you this trend over time and how it's been throughout, these last few days. When it's a really bad air quality day, it'll change the color, and it'll tell you members of sensitive groups may experience health effects if they're exposed for 24 hours. So this is what we would call bad for sensitive populations or unhealthy for sensitive populations. And you can see there that it's going up. And this is something that we checked back in December when we did a community meeting for the town council at the end of last year. It will also tell you, and sorry for the distortion here on this picture, it was actually a little bit smaller and I blew it up, but it'll also tell you when the monitor is not reporting. It says current status, not received for 43 minutes. So these tools are really useful in democratizing the data, making sure it's available for everyone. Anyone can go to this website and see what the air quality is like, but it's also important for maintenance and quality assurance and making sure that things are running the way that they should be. So once Karen noticed that this was down, she quickly, let us know and herself also worked to get it back online. And to describe a little bit more about the data and how it, interpreting this data, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Abraham. Let's see, so I think I have to go to my participants. Okay, Abraham, are you there?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So what everyone is seeing here, there's 2 charts, and that's because this is the air quality from a sensor located at the Cheverly pool. And each sensor, or each monitor actually has 2 sensors on it. So the red chart above is one sensor and the blue chart below is a second sensor. And they're basically identical because the monitor, or the sensors are located very close to each other on the monitor. So the air around those sensors should be the same. So as you can see, there's a big spike in November, around November 7th. And then the rest of October and December are lower. And this is, we don't know why this is, but essentially we're looking at the daily level for each day to see the average of the air quality on each day. And then in November 7th or 8th, it's a lot higher. And then we also have another monitor located Karen's house. And also you can see in November, there's a large spike around the same time. and then the Cheverly Town Hall. At the same time, there's a large spike. But the rest of the month, there's still ups and downs. And the more monitors we have, the easier it will be to identify why the ups and downs are occurring and when they occur.
Yeah, thanks, Abraham. And what this allows us to do is see, we're able to see that, okay, this is a phenomenon, this spike here around in early November, this is a phenomenon that is experienced in 3 different parts of town. So in this case, it doesn't necessarily show that it's pinpointed in any particular area, but by having network, a dispersed network, we will be able to, if there is a spike that's only affecting one side of town, or it's coming maybe from a specific source, having this dispersed network allows us to know where it is, when it happens, and what we're hoping to do is through this project, as this project develops, actually include an alert system so that, right now, anyone can check the data at their leisure, but there's not necessarily, unless you're particularly interested in that, or unless you're getting paid to do it, folks aren't really going to have their eyes glued to the air quality. And you might, and it depends on your exposure and your experience with air quality in your town and in your community. If you're like in communities that are constantly, under siege for bad smells and bad air, then you might be checking your air quality just like you check the weather. You're like, okay, I'm going outside today. I want to make sure that the air, I want to see what I'm going to be wearing, what level of mask. Is an N95 good enough? Do I need a respirator today? So this is kind of the power of the data, and this is the opportunity and the capacities that haven't been available before this project, and that we're now kind of being able to explore because of the project. There was another question in terms of what's done with the data that's collected, and how can it be, or how is it being used to improve air quality in Cheverly. And so as we're still kind of in the ramping up phases, and this is Case, so thank you very much for the question, Case. As we're still in the ramping up phase, we haven't started using this data for anything, but in the future, the goal is to use it to inform decisions on permitting. Something that's gaining traction now at the national level, and it has in different states and different communities, is this concept of cumulative impacts. So breaking that down, that's the additive impact of having multiple pollution sources in a close area. You're not ever, one thing that we learned pretty quickly in public health as students is that you're not ever exposed to just one thing, which, as Dr. Wilson was talking about, these monitors are focusing in on particulate matter, but we mentioned that there are other pollutants, at play here. So the cumulative impact approach means that, okay, for instance, using Smith & Sons as an example, you have Smith & Sons down there in the Southwest. If MDE or other permitting or regulatory bodies were looking at things from a cumulative impact perspective, they would say, okay, Smith & Sons is permitted to release X amount of pollution as a part of their daily operations, but we're going to set a threshold for this whole area, and other entities in that area have to collectively cannot go past that threshold because you're taking into account the cumulative effect. And so that's what this data will hopefully help to put in place. Here in Maryland, this has been put in place in places like Minnesota and California recently, and New Jersey. So hopefully this can kind of move us toward that checkpoint in Maryland, in Cheverly, from the permitting perspective. Another thing is compliance. So if we're constantly seeing these spikes going over, then that is an indication to talk to MDE and say, hey, here's what our community source data is saying. The differential, the fact that the level itself is less important, that it's going super high or super low. What's important is these swings, the relative difference. So that's the indicator that we can push as a signal to MDE and say, okay, we don't have, like Dr. Wilson was saying, this project is only funded to a certain amount. Working within that bounds, we've we found something that's concerning, come on, MDE, bring in your fancy, expensive equipment and do your job, do your monitoring based on, you know, we can kickstart that process using the data, using the findings from this project. So Case, I hope that answers your question. Mary asked about data being analyzed and what are the results. So here are some of those results shown there. And Ray is suggesting that monitors be added to the WSSC plant at the intersection of Anacostia River and Kenilworth Ave. Also at the 2 Greyhound bus maintenance facilities in Tuxedo, adjoining the Cheverly boundary along Tuxedo Road. Yes, so we definitely have the bus terminal on our wish list. Excuse me, I'm not sure if we had the WSSC plant. So we're happy. Thank you for that feedback. We'll add it to the frame. Erica says, thank you for the presentation. My family is impacted weekly by a noxious odor akin to burning plastic. The smell is so intense at nights. We have to close the windows and turn on a ventilation system. How can we access current monitoring data located in town? What is the process for reporting odors to the town? So yeah, like we said, we're building this in, and thank you very much for the comment, Erica. And then it goes on to say, recommend that the town invest in a handheld photoionization monitor to assist with identifying the source of odor complaints. So a couple things, yes. These data are available at the PurpleAir website here. So you can go to PurpleAir, and that's for your own use. In terms of reporting it, in the future, we hope to implement, you know, something similar to like a 411 or a 511, one of the 11s, where you can log these reports and log these comments, these public comments about what's going on in air, because it really, what's important, and this goes back to what are we using the data for? The paper trail is crucial in being able to show that there is a record of these spikes or these smells, whatever. That's how you kind of build up the validity. I don't like using the word of validity because who am I or who is anyone to invalidate the experiences that community members are having. But it brings up the level of that, the usefulness of that data if you have it logged and you have it recorded over time. So as of right now, you know, as Dr. Wilson said, CBPR is all about action in the present. I would say that we will definitely set up a Gmail account to log those complaints, and we can share that out with the town as part of this project. And this would, for this point, would just be for the purpose of record keeping. It wouldn't necessarily be responding immediately to those smells, but just so that there's somewhere to put in the public record that, and I mean, it might not even have to be, we can talk to the mayor. It might not even have to be a Gmail account. It might be, you know, an @cheverly.gov account where those complaints can be logged and registered. But there's also the Smell My City app where you can add that, and you know, that's almost better because, you know, you have access to it perpetually. You can share it with folks. It puts it on a map. So those are just some options for reporting in the current frame. Okay, so I think that's it for the Q&A, and feel free to keep going through the Q&A. We just have a few, we're coming up close on the hour now, so we just have a few more slides to close us out. Oh yeah, there's some process slides about joining the team. So we were able to do this even despite COVID. We were able to do this. You might notice that this isn't exactly 6 feet, but we were able to put up these monitors last summer, and we are right now looking for people to join kind of 2 efforts relevant to this project. Three efforts technically. One is hosting the monitors, and hosting the monitors is not very invasive at all. It's a monitor that goes out external to your residence or your business. It just needs a power hookup, Ideally, it will also have, we also, for this phase, we need to tap into the Wi-Fi. So if you have Wi-Fi nearby, that's a bonus. We do have some funding for Wi-Fi hotspots, but we don't have much. So we're trying to save those hotspot areas for places like Boyd Park, which is here, which doesn't have any Wi-Fi at all. So we're looking for monitor hosts. We're also looking for people to serve on the community advisory board to help guide this project, from a community lens and community perspective, and make sure, just like, one of the people in the Q&A said, or I think it was Ray, we should be monitoring at WSSC. Those are insights that we can only get by having community members in the driver's seat. So monitoring hosts, community advisory board members, and also an action team to be trained on how to install these monitors, how they work, the ins and outs of them. We were hoping, initially, we kind of envisioned this as a workforce development opportunity, but COVID shifted all kinds of things with that. And so we're looking at, as of right now, there's not money in the budget for compensation, but we can kind of do it as a skills building activity. And hopefully in the future, they'll be able to do some incentivization around getting the monitors up and maintaining the monitors and stuff like that. Because the idea here is to we as researchers, our job is not to come in and run the show and hold all the, if we're the only ones who know how to set the monitors up and make sure they're running properly, then that's a way of keeping the power on the academic side. So we don't want to do that. We want to share the knowledge, share the power for this project, and make sure that everyone, that community members are involved in this project. And then these are some more pictures. These ones are at the town hall. So this is that PurpleAir monitor and that AeroQual monitor there. And sometimes there's a little bit of maintenance that we have to do. I think the town got a new outlet out of it. So making sure it's value added, this project. Yeah, so that's the end of what I have for us today. I want to thank everyone for joining on. I'm going to check the Q&A one last time just to make sure, just to see what we've got. Mary says she can recruit some high school students to get their community hours needed for graduation. So yes, that would be excellent. We are, and just so I say this up front, I've alluded to, or I've mentioned COVID several times. We are figuring out how to do this in the safest, most socially distant way. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine rollout and stuff like that. But I just want to make sure, if there are any concerns about that, we are taking it very, very seriously with our recruitment and with getting these monitors up. And for more information about hosting, on how to be a host or what's kind of required of hosts, we do have a one-pager that I think Karen has access to that she can send around. And I think if all of you, this is an important point, if all of you joined us through the Google form, then we have your email addresses. But if you got the link from a friend, which is totally fine, we might not have your email address. So if you can send an email to, I think there's a few different ways. I can go ahead and put my email address in the chat. Actually, I can put it up here. I think I have it here. Oh yeah, so this is the siegelab@gmail.com email. And you can tweet us, you can email us, and we can get, in that way we can get in touch with you if you're interested in hosting a monitor. And so with that, I think I'll close us out unless there's more, any more discussion to be had in the Q&A or in the chat. And yes, thank you very much, Carl, for the ASL interpretation. And thank you to all the other panelists on board today. Okay. Mayor, if you have any last words, I'll let you close us out.
My last words will begin and end with thank you. Thank you for continuing to work with us over these years. Thank you for the past leadership of Mayor Callahan to bring this forward. We hope to be, as was shared in this presentation, to be able to be operational enough to start to have what we're gathering placed into action. So I also appreciate on a Saturday morning, people have many different things to do with their time. And we still, I think at one point had 20 or 21 attendees in addition to the panelists and those who are closely working with this. Dr. Jacoby Wilson, I have sat in rooms with you where you have served as expert witness, where you have stepped forward and empowered people. And I so appreciate that distinction that you make. It's critical for our community. I'll tell you that quite clearly. Also, those who have responded here today about what can we do with this? How can we connect all of these pieces? We're already starting to do that. I think David Knipe had noted, and Erica, about corresponding situations that we hear a boom or we have a foul odor. How can we start to connect these? We're doing that in very small ways, meaning that I've gone through and listed each time that there's been a smell or a boom, and now trying to go back and see how they connect. That's something that I would love to see if the air quality monitoring team that comes together can actually help us make that happen. And that's going to be incredibly important, not only for addressing now, but for when we look at that cumulative question and we look at this is what we've seen, how much more can we bear on this specific date if we judge that this is related to industrial operations or something to do with traffic. All of these things are incredibly important. So please stay engaged. If you have things, don't assume that we've seen them here. I know that Jan's put his email up. My email is mayor@cheverly-md.gov. Feel free to send all of that to me so that I can follow up with staff. And we're entering into budget discussions. Money matters. So if you'd like to see this program expand, there are about personal wearable air monitoring devices, other things to extend internet access, to do these sorts of things. Bring that forward. Talk with your elected officials about that and to see what we can bear in this next year, because we do want to continue to both get everything into a place and expand this based on the recommendations of the team. With that, thank you once again, Dr. Wilson. If there's something that you would like to say to carry us out, I'd greatly appreciate that.
Oh, I don't have anything to say. I saw another point about. I'm gonna throw it back to Yan and let Yan close it out. Question about the workshop, the second workshop, the health workshop.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. So tentatively, we're spacing these out on a bi-weekly schedule. So the next session will be on the 13th, February 13th, from the same time, 10:30 to noon. And that will focus more on air pollution and health. And then our final wrap up to the series, we'll be talking about using this data for action and policy. Yeah.
And also to add that this workshop was recorded, and we'll work with the team to see about posting this up on the Cheverly website for those who weren't able to attend. So as people come to you with questions and you want to try to answer that, so you will also be able to refer them to the video of this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Take care.
The rest of your weekends. Bye-bye.